Shalom. I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you to the Hebraic Heritage Ministries Yeshiva Discipleship Program. In this teaching, we're going to be sharing with you on the subject of Yeshua, the daily Tamid lamb offering. And in doing so, we're going to be covering the following areas. Number one, we are going to first review the component parts and elements of the daily Tamid lamb offering and see how it is associated and connected with the half shekel offering that the God of Israel commanded his people to make for the service of the sanctuary and as an atonement for their soul. Secondly, we're going to give an overview of the daily activities in the temple as it relates and pertains to the daily Tamid lamb offering. And in doing so, we are going to see how various parts of the day's activities in the temple, as well as the daily Tamid lamb offering itself, is related and associated with the events associated with Yeshua dying on the tree. And then we're going to look at the part of the temple daily service that is associated with the priest offering incense at the altar of incense, and how this is associated with the birth of John the Baptist or Yochanan the Immerser. Then we're going to examine how the rabbis see Abraham offering up Isaac on the altar as a burnt offering, as described in Genesis chapter 22, is a prophetic foreshadowing of the daily Tamid lamb offering, first in the tabernacle and then in the first and second temples. Then we're going to look at how in Orthodox Judaism, how their daily prayers, with the focus being on the morning prayers, is patterned after the daily activities in the temple and the offering of the daily Tamid lamb offering. Then we're going to see how it's prophesied in the end of days that there will be a renewing of the daily Tamid lamb offering by Orthodox Jews in Jerusalem on the Temple Mount in the end of days, and the demand to stop that daily offering by the false Messiah and the beast system will bring about the start of the Great Tribulation, and how the stopping of the daily Tamid lamb offering is linked and associated with what happened in the beginning of time before Adam and Eve was in the Garden of Eden, when Lucifer led a rebellion of the heavenly hosts against Yeshua, his throne, and the continuous worship of Yeshua as the Lamb who was slain from the foundation of the world in the heavenly tabernacle. And finally, we're going to see that every Sabbath in the temple, the God of Israel commanded an additional lamb offering, and in doing so, and as a part of the temple Sabbath service, the Song of Moses, Exodus chapter 15, was recited in the temple, and how the temple Sabbath service regarding the Song of Moses is instruction or teaching, or is prophetic of an outline of events in the book of Revelation, from Revelation in chapter 4 through Revelation chapter 19. So this is a summary of the outline of things that we're going to learn in this teaching. So now let's begin to study the details of these things. First, we're going to review the details or the component parts of the daily Tamid lamb offering and how it is associated with the commandment by the God of Israel that every Israelite was to offer a half shekel once a year for the service of the sanctuary and for an atonement of their soul. To begin with, we want to look at Exodus chapter 29, verse 38, as it is written. Now this is that which you shall offer upon the altar, 2 lambs of the first year, day by day, continually. And this word continually is the Strong's number 8548, and it is the Hebrew word tamid. In Exodus chapter 29, verse 39, it is written, the one lamb you shall offer in the morning, and the other lamb you shall offer at even. In the Hebrew, what this means is in the afternoon. So we have a lamb that's offered in the morning and a second lamb that is offered in the afternoon. In the book Ein Yaakov by Rabbi Yaakov ben Haviv, who lived from 1460 to 1516, in his introduction to this book cites a classic Tanaic dispute pertaining to what constitutes the greatest verse in the Torah. And this question was asked by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, the editor of the Mishnah. So Ben Zoma said that the most important verse in the Torah is the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, from Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 4. Ben Nanas says that the most important verse in the Torah is love your neighbors yourself, from Leviticus chapter 19, verse 18. However, Shimon ben Pazi says that the most important verse in the Torah is the first lamb you shall sacrifice in the morning, and the second lamb you shall sacrifice in the evening, from Exodus chapter 29, verse 39. Rabbi Plony stood up and said, the halakha, or the official view of Orthodox Judaism, of the most important verse in the Torah is in accordance with Ben Pazi. So this amplifies for you the significance, as seen by the rabbis, of the daily Tamid lamb offering. Therefore, as we continue in this study, we should pay very close attention to understanding the daily Tamid lamb offering and the spiritual application to Yeshua and helping us to understand the things of the kingdom of God. So in the book, The Temple, Its Ministry and Services by Alfred Edersheim, on page 108, he states the following. According to general agreement, the morning sacrifice, or the morning lamb, was brought at the third hour of the biblical day, corresponding to our 9 o'clock in the morning. In the works of Josephus, in Antiquity of the Jews, 14.4.3, he explains that the evening lamb sacrifice was done around 3 p.m. He writes, and anyone may hence learn how very great piety we exercise toward God in the observance of our laws, since the priests were not at all hindered from their sacred ministrations by their fear during the time of the Roman siege of Jerusalem and the temple, but did still twice a day, according to the Torah, in the morning and about the 9th hour, that would be 3 p.m. in the afternoon, offer their sacrifices on the altar in the temple. So the daily Tamid lamb offering was a burnt offering unto the God of Israel, and it was to be offered with what the King James refers to as the meat offering, which in Hebrew is minha, which is an offering you give from your heart, and the drink offering. In Exodus chapter 29 verse 40 it is written, and with the one lamb a 10th deal of flour mingled with the 4th part of a hin of beaten oil, and the 4th part of a hin of wine for a drink offering. That would be in the morning. Then in Exodus chapter 29 verse 41, and the other lamb you shall offer at evening, or in the afternoon, as we've already seen, at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, and you shall thereto, according to the meat offering of the morning, and according to the drink offering thereof, for a sweet savor, an offering made by fire unto the Lord. Spiritually, the drink offering represents a total commitment of ourselves unto the God of Israel. Paul referred to his life and service unto Messiah and unto his body was likened unto a drink offering. In Philippians chapter 2 verses 16 and 17, it is written, holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Messiah, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain. But even if I am being poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrifice and service of your faith. The God of Israel specified that the meat offering, the minha, was to be seasoned with salt. In Leviticus chapter 2 verse 8 and verse 13, it is written, and you shall bring the meat offering. When it is presented unto the priest, he shall bring it unto the altar. In every oblation of your meat offering shall you season with salt. Neither shall you suffer the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your meat offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt. The God of Israel required salt upon his altar as an expression of worship unto him. Yeshua said in Mark chapter 9 verse 49, "For every one shall be salted with fire, and every sacrifice shall be salted with salt." So the burnt offering was given with salt. In Ezekiel chapter 43, verses 18 and 24, it is written, "And he said unto me, Son of man, thus says the Lord God, these are the ordinances of the altar in the day when they shall make it, to offer burnt offerings thereon, and to sprinkle blood thereon. And ye shall offer them, and the priest shall cast salt upon them, and they shall offer them up for a burnt offering unto the Lord." So what's the spiritual meaning of salt being used upon the altar of the God of Israel? Salt is associated with having a relationship with someone, and in having that relationship, for it to be fixed forever and unchangeable. It meant an eternal relationship with full commitment unto the other party. So what the God of Israel is saying to us, he wants to have a relationship with us that is eternal, fixed forever and unchanging, and he wants it to be a relationship of full commitment. So from the book, The Salt Covenant by Clay Trumbull on page 134, he explains, salt stands for and corresponds with, and it symbolizes blood and life. As such, it represents the supreme gift from the supreme giver. Because of this significance of salt, when made use as means of a lasting union or relationship, the covenant of salt is a form or phase of the blood covenant, or it can symbolize or represent the essence of the heart of a blood covenant as being fixed, permanent, and unchangeable, enduring forever. So next we can see how the offering of a morning lamb and an afternoon lamb every day as a burnt offering unto the God of Israel was meant by him to be continuous, or in Hebrew, Tamid. In Exodus chapter 29 verse 42, it is written, "This shall be a continuous burnt offering throughout your generations, at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation before the Lord, where I will meet you to speak there unto you." This lamb burnt offering was to be upon God's altar all night. In Leviticus chapter 6 verses 8 and 9, it is written, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Command Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the Torah of the burnt offering. It is the burnt offering because of the burning upon the altar all night unto the morning, and the fire of the altar shall be burning in it." So, in looking at some of the details of this service, initially, the ashes of the burnt offering was put beside the altar. We can see this in Leviticus chapter 6, verse 10, as it is written, "And the priest shall put on his linen garment, and his linen breeches shall he put upon his flesh, and take up the ashes which the fire has consumed with the burnt offering on the altar, and he shall put them beside the altar." Then, as the ashes start to accumulate, eventually the ashes of the burnt offering are to be taken outside the camp. In Leviticus chapter 6 verse 11, it is written, "And he shall put off his garments and put on other garments, and carry forth the ashes without or outside the camp unto a clean place." Spiritually, our lives are to be a burnt offering to the God of Israel, which means he wants our full and total and complete commitment of our lives unto him. We can see this from Romans chapter 12 verse 1, as it is written, "I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies," or our lives, "a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. So, in the daily activities of the temple, there were certain duties that were to be performed by the priests and the Levites. And the instruction regarding the service of these things, as it pertained to the temple, was given to King David by the God of Israel through his Spirit, which he then gave to Solomon, regarding the details and the instructions for the courses of the priests and the Levites. We can see this from 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 11 and verse 13, as it is written. Then David gave to Solomon his son the pattern of the porch, and also for the courses of the priests and the Levites, and for all the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and for all the vessels of service in the house of the Lord. So these things were given to King David, that he passed along to Solomon, who the God of Israel used to build the first temple, and these things were given to King David by the Holy Spirit. We can see this in 1 Chronicles chapter 28, verses 12 and 19, as it is written. And the pattern of all that he had by the Spirit, of the courts of the house of the Lord. All this, said David, the Lord made me understand in writing by his hand upon me, even all the works of this pattern. So various priestly duties were decided by the drawing of lots. We can see this from 1 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 5, as it is written. Thus were they divided by lot, one sort with another. For the governors of the sanctuary and the governors of the house of God were of the sons of Eleazar and of the sons of Ithamar. So Eleazar and Ithamar were sons of Aaron. So the God of Israel instructed King David to organize the priests in the 24 courses. This is shown to us in 1 Chronicles chapter 24, verse 1 and verse 4, as it is written. Now these are the divisions of the sons of Aaron. The sons of Aaron were Nadab and Abihu, Eleazar and Ithamar. So since Nadab and Abihu offered strange fire unto the Lord when the children of Israel were in the wilderness, the God of Israel judged them, and they died. And thus who were left of the sons of Aaron were Eleazar and Ithamar. And so among the sons of Eleazar were 16 chief men of the house of their fathers, and 8 among the sons of Ithamar, according to the house of their fathers. It is explained in the Talmud, in Ta'anit 26a, that these 24 courses of priests served in the temple according to their courses every year, twice a year. The Talmud explains it as follows. The following are the details concerning the Ma'amadot, that is, the 24 divisions of the Israelites, corresponding to the 24 courses of priests who would serve in the temple. The earlier prophets, referring to the days of King David, instituted 24 mishmarot, or districts, and each mishmar, or district, was represented at the temple in Jerusalem by its own ma'amad, or group or divisions of people consisting of priests, Levites, and the general population of Israelites. And when the time came for the mishmar, that is the district, to go to Jerusalem, the priests and Levites went up to Jerusalem, and the Israelites of that mishmar or district assembled in their cities and read from the Torah the story of creation. So the specific priestly course, when it was their duty to serve during the course of the year, they worked in the temple for 1 week at a time. And we can see this from 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verses 14, 23, and 25, as it is written. And of the Levites, and so they and their children had the oversight of the gates of the house of the Lord, and their brethren, which were in their villages, were to come after 7 days from time to time with them. So the service of the Levites in the temple began and ended on each Sabbath. In 2 Chronicles chapter 23, verse 2, verse 6, and verse 8, it is written, And they gathered the Levites out of all the cities of Judah, and they came to Jerusalem. But let none come into the house of the Lord save the priests, and they that minister of the Levites. So the Levites took every man his men that were to come in on the Sabbath with them that were to go out on the Sabbath. Next, we can see that the Levites had a variety of duties in the temple for their service. In 1 Chronicles chapter 23, verses 27 and 28, it is written, "For by the last words of David the Levites were numbered from 20 years old and above, because their office was to wait on the sons of Aaron for the service of the house of the Lord, in the courts and in the chambers, and in the purifying of all holy things, in the work of the service of the house of God." We can further see how the Levites had a variety of duties in the temple from 1 Chronicles chapter 23, verses 29 and 31, as it is written, "But for the showbread, and for the fine flour for meat offering, and for the unleavened cakes, and for that which is baked in the pan, and for that which is fried, and for all manner of measure and size, and to offer all burnt sacrifices unto the Lord in the Sabbaths, in the new moons, and on the set feasts, by number, according to the order commanded unto them continually before the Lord." So among the different duties of the Levites in the temple, there were those who were appointed to be singers and worshipers. 1 Chronicles chapter 25, verses 6 and 7. All these were under the hands of their father for song in the house of the Lord with cymbals, psalteries, and harps for the service of the house of God. So the number of them with their brethren that were instructed in the songs of the Lord, even all that were cunning, was 268. So let's summarize this first part of the teaching that we've covered so far. Number 1, the God of Israel commanded that there be 2 lambs offered as a burnt offering every day, along with the meat or minha and drink offering. Number 2, 1 lamb was offered in the morning around 9 a.m., and the second lamb was offered in the afternoon around 3 p.m. Number 3, the burnt offering was made with salt. Spiritually, salt represents an eternal relationship and commitment to another party, in this case, the people of Israel with the God of Israel. Number 4, the burnt offering upon the altar was to remain all night. Number 5, initially, the ashes of the burnt offering were put beside the altar. Later, they were to be taken outside the camp to a clean place. Number 6, a fire was to remain on the altar at all times. Number 7, the God of Israel gave King David instruction for the courses of the priests and Levites. Number 8, there were 24 courses of priests. In addition to the festival seasons, each course served in the temple twice a year, and they did so during their week of the year from Sabbath to Sabbath. Number 9, the priests and Levites had a variety of duties which were assigned to them by drawing lots. Number 10, among the various duties of the Levites, there were those who were appointed to be singers and worshipers who used different kinds of musical instruments in their worship. Next, we're going to look at the commandment by the God of Israel that every Israelite above 20 years of age was to bring once a year a half shekel for the service of the sanctuary of God, and also as an atonement for their soul. And this is how it was understood how the daily Tamid lamb offering was a communal or a community sacrifice. It represented, and it was done on behalf of the nation. So the daily Tamid burnt offering was a communal sacrifice, and it was financed, or it was paid out of the half shekel contribution collected from every member of the nation of Israel. So the daily Tamid lamb burnt offering was associated and linked with the entire nation of Israel. And this is how we get to the understanding how when Yeshua died on the tree, and we will see later in the teaching, how the way in which he died on the tree and the process by which he went through in doing so is associated with this daily Tamid lamb offering. And this is how Yeshua's death and the shedding of his blood on the tree, he was doing so on behalf of the entire nation of Israel and for the entire nation of Israel, but not just the nation of Israel. As we see from John chapter 3 verse 16, he also died to forgive the sins of the entire world, not just the nation of Israel. We can see how the half shekel was given for atonement of the soul from Exodus chapter 30 verses 11 and 12, as it is written, "And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, When you take the sum of the children of Israel after their number, then they shall give every man a ransom for his soul unto the Lord, when you shall number them, that there be no plague among them when you number them. So the half shekel donation was used for the service of the tabernacle. We can see this from Exodus chapter 30 verses 13 and 14 as it is written. This they shall give every one that passes among them that are numbered, half a shekel, after the shekel of the sanctuary. A shekel is 20 gerahs. A half shekel shall be the offering of the Lord. And every one that passes among them that are numbered from 20 years old and above shall give an offering unto the Lord. Exodus chapter 30 verse 15. It is written, the rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than a half a shekel, when they shall give an offering unto the Lord to make an atonement for their souls. Continuing in Exodus chapter 30 verse 16, and ye shall take the atonement money of the children of Israel, and shall appoint it for the service of the tabernacle of the congregation, that it may be a memorial unto the children of Israel before the Lord to make an atonement for your souls. So a beka, which is a form of weight measurement, is equal to a half shekel. In Exodus chapter 38 verse 26 it is written, a beka for every man, that is a half shekel, after the shekel of the sanctuary for every one that went to be numbered from 20 years old and upward. A beka was discovered from the first century in Jerusalem in 2018 as excavations was being made at that time. So regarding the finding of this beka, archaeologist Eli Shukran explained, when the half shekel tax was brought to the temple during the first temple period, there were no coins, so they used silver ingots. In order to calculate the weight of these silver pieces, they would put them on one side of the scales, and on the other side they placed the beka weight. The beka was equivalent to the half shekel, which every person from the age of 20 years old and up was required to bring to the temple. Ultimately, the silver from the half shekel was used as sockets which held up the tabernacle. In Exodus chapter 38 verse 27 it is written, and of the 100 talents of silver were cast the sockets of the sanctuary, and the sockets of the veil, 100 sockets of the 100 talents, a talent for a socket. So the spiritual picture, given that the silver from the half shekel was used as sockets for the tabernacle, is the foundation of the holding up of the structure of the tabernacle, represents the contribution of every person from the community of Israel. So the foundation of the holding up of the tabernacle, which is a spiritual picture of the body of Messiah, consists of the salvation of every member of the body of Messiah, as the half shekel was given for the atonement of your soul. So once again, the spiritual picture that's being shown to us here, the sockets which was used to hold up the structure of the tabernacle representing the domain of the God of Israel, representing the body of Messiah, that the body of Messiah consists of every person who Messiah has redeemed through the shedding of his blood on the tree. The word translated as sockets in our Bible, which in Hebrew is Eden, is a cognate or a related word to the Hebrew word Adon, which is translated as Lord. So we can see a relationship between the silver from the half shekel and the Lord himself. That is Yeshua. In Exodus chapter 38 verse 27 it is written, and of the 100 talents of silver were cast the sockets of the sanctuary. So the word sockets is the Strong's number 134. It's the Hebrew word Eden, and it comes from the Hebrew word Adon, which means master or Lord. So the silver half shekel was used for redemption money. We can see this from Numbers chapter 3 verses 47 and 49 as it is written. You shall even take 5 shekels apiece by the pole after the shekel of the sanctuary shall you take them. A shekel is 20 gerahs. And Moses took the redemption money. In Exodus chapter 38 verse 26 it is written, a beka for every man. Every man is the Strong's number 1538. It's the Hebrew word gogalet, which is rendered in our New Testament as Golgotha. So the Hebrew word Golgotha means a skull, or it represents or means a person. As when you take a census, you are polling people. And when you poll people, you count them. So you are in effect counting their heads. So the polling or census or counting of people, and thus is translated in Exodus chapter 38 verse 26 as every man, means in Hebrew Golgotha. So we can see the connection in Hebrew that when Yeshua died at a place called Golgotha, there's a deeper meaning than Golgotha being understood to mean the place of the skull. It's really communicating the thought that Golgotha in Hebrew means or represents every person. So when Yeshua died at Golgotha, the Hebrew is communicating that Yeshua is dying for every person. So in John chapter 19 verse 17, it is written, "And he, Yeshua, bearing his cross, went forth into a place called the place of a skull, which is called in the Hebrew Golgotha." So the spiritual picture that we can see from the half shekel, its use and application, is that the melted down silver half shekels, which is associated with redemption, that every person was to give. So the silver half shekel represented the redemption of every person. That was the foundation or the sockets of the tabernacle. So the foundation of the tabernacle is a spiritual picture of the family of God or the body of Messiah. So the spiritual picture is that the body of Messiah consists of every person who is redeemed by the blood of Yeshua. And this is the spiritual meaning of what was being represented physically through the donation of the half shekel and the use of the half shekel in the tabernacle. So in Exodus chapter 38 verses 26 and 27 it is written, "A beka for every man, Golgotha, that is a half shekel. And of the 100 talents of silver were cast the sockets of the sanctuary." So given that every Israelite 20 years and older was to give a half shekel once a year, it needed to be paid before the first of the biblical first month in the biblical calendar, which the biblical name for the first month of the year is Aviv, and the Babylonian name is Nisan. In the Mishnah, in Shekalim 1:1, it states, "On the first of the month of Adar, which is the month that precedes Nisan, public announcement is made concerning the payment of the shekels, because the contribution had to be paid before the first of Nisan." So in the temple, there were designated places where you could donate your money for the things associated with the service of the temple. And so these temple treasury chests were called shofars because of the noise that came from people dropping their coins in these temple treasure chests. In Mishnah Shekalim 2:1, it says, "Just as there were chests in the temple." So in reference to the chests themselves, the commentary in the Mishnah is that these chests were shaped like the shofar, narrow at the top where the opening was and widening lower down. So the chests were called horns of blowing. And in Mishnah Shekalim 6:1, it explains that there were in the temple 13 of these treasury chests. This is the background to Matthew chapter 6 verse 2, where Yeshua taught, "Therefore when you give your money, when you give alms, don't make a public showing of it. Do not sound a trumpet before you." And so the phrase "sound of the trumpet" when you're giving your alms is a reference to the noise that coins made as they were dropped into these trumpet-shaped treasury chests. And because there were people who came to Jerusalem in the temple who lived outside of the land of Israel, particularly at the festival seasons, there were money changers who collected the half shekel during the month of Adar, which preceded the first month of the biblical year, called in the Torah Aviv, but the Babylonian name was Nisan. In the Mishnah in Shekalim 1:3, it explains, "On the 15th or thereabout of Adar, tables of money changers were set up in the different provinces where the Jewish people lived. And on the 25th of Adar, these money changers were set up in the temple." So Mishnah Shekalim 3:1 explains that money was appropriated to fund the daily service of the temple 3 times a year. At 3 periods of the year were the appropriations made, that is from the shekels in the chamber. A half a month before Passover, a half a month before Shavuot or Pentecost, and a half a month before Sukkot, or the Feast of Tabernacles. The half shekel donations from every Israelite who was 20 years and older funded the temple activities, in particular the daily Tamid lamb burnt offering. In Mishnah, Shekalim 4:1, it explains what was done with the appropriations. They bought therewith the daily burnt offerings and the additional burnt offerings and their drink offerings, the omer of the 2 loaves and the showbread and all the other public offerings. So let's summarize what we've learned in this part of the teaching. Number 1, the daily Tamid lamb offering was a communal sacrifice. Number 2, every Israelite from 20 years old was to give a half shekel every year for the service of the sanctuary and as an atonement for their soul. Number 3, the silver from the half shekel was used as sockets for the tabernacle. Number 4, the tabernacle was physically supported from the half shekel contribution from the community of Israel. Number 5, the Hebrew word for every person above 20 who gave the half shekel is associated with the word Golgotha, as Golgotha in Hebrew means skull or every person, as in taking a census. Number 6, the half shekel had to be paid by the first month of the biblical calendar. If necessary, money changers were used to collect the money. Number 7, there were 13 chests in the temple to collect money. They were shaped like shofars, and when you made too much noise with your coins and dropping your money into these chests, it was said that you were sounding the shofar. So next, we are going to give an overview of the daily activities in the temple, and particularly as it pertains to those things regarding the daily Tamid lamb offering. And in doing so, as we go over each element of the daily activities in the temple, we're going to make an association or a connection how it was associated with Yeshua in the events surrounding which led to his death upon the tree. So now let's begin to understand some of the daily activities in the temple. We're going to start with the night watches in the temple. In the book, The Temple, Its Ministry and Services by Alfred Edersheim on page 111, he writes, "At night, guards were placed in 24 stations about the gates and courts, and of these 21 were occupied by Levites alone. The other innermost 3 jointly by priests and Levites, and each guard consisted of 10 men, so that in all 240 Levites and 30 priests were on duty every night. The God of Israel instructed that the Levites were to wear white garments. In 2 Chronicles chapter 5 verse 12 it is written, "And also the Levites, which were the singers, all of them of Asaph, of Heman, of Jeduthun, with their sons and their brethren, being arrayed in white linen." Spiritually, white garments represents righteousness. Ecclesiastes chapter 9 verse 8 it is written, "Let your garments be always white." In Daniel chapter 12 verse 10 it is written, "And many shall be purified and made white." In Revelation chapter 3 verse 5 it is written, "He that overcomes, the same shall be clothed in white raiment." So in the Jewish rendition of the night, there were 3 watches in the night. This is explained in the Talmud in Berahot 3a. For it says, "It has been taught," Rabbi Eliezer says, "the night has 3 watches." And Rabbi Isaac, son of Samuel, says, in the name of Rav, "The night has 3 watches." So the first watch of the night is sunset to 10 p.m., a 4-hour period. Lamentations chapter 2 verse 19, it is written, "Arise, cry out in the night. In the beginning of the watches pour out your heart like water before the face of the Lord." The second watch, or 4-hour period, is from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Judges chapter 7 verse 19 has a reference to this, as it is written, "So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch." The third watch, or 4-hour period, was from 2 a.m. to sunrise, which is roughly 6 a.m. In Exodus chapter 14, verse 24, it is written, "And it came to pass that in the morning watch the Lord looked unto the host of the Egyptians through the pillar of fire and of the cloud, and troubled the host of the Egyptians." From the Roman rendition of the night, there were 4 watches in the night. The reference to these 4 watches are in Mark chapter 13, verse 35. As Yeshua says, "Watch ye therefore, for you know not when the master of the house comes, at evening, or at midnight, or at the cock crowing, or in the morning." So these 4 watches correspond to 9 p.m., midnight, 3 a.m., and 6 a.m. So in the Roman view of the night watches, the 4th watch is 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. Yeshua made reference to this in Matthew chapter 14, verse 25, as it is written, "In the 4th watch of the night, Yeshua went unto them walking on the sea." Next, we're going to see that the head of the temple was called the captain of the temple. And the reference to the captain of the temple can be seen in Acts chapter 4, verse 1, as it is written. "And as they spoke unto the people, the priests, and the captain of the temple, and the Sadducees came upon them." We can also see a reference to the captain of the temple in Acts chapter 5, verse 24, as it is written. "Now when the high priest and the captain of the temple and the chief priests heard these things." So the captain of the temple was the leader over the Levitical temple guard. This explanation comes from the Jewish Encyclopedia. The captain of the temple served the high priest of the temple and was the leader over the Levitical guard and priests that kept watch of the temple at night. The temple night watcher who fell asleep would have his clothes burned. And this is explained in the Mishnah in Menot 1:2, as it says, "The officer of the temple mount used to go round to every watch with lighted torches before him, and if any watcher did not rise when he came to them, and he said to him, 'Peace be to you, supervisor of the temple mount,' it was obvious then that he was asleep, and he used to belabor him with his stick, and he was also at liberty to burn his clothes. The others used to say, 'What is the noise in the Azarah?' It is the cry of a Levite who is being beaten and whose clothes are being burnt because he was asleep at his post as a night watcher." There's a reference to this thing that was done in the temple by Yeshua in Revelation chapter 16, verse 15, and he's speaking as the captain of our temple. Yeshua said, "Behold, I come as a thief. Blessed is he that watches and keeps his garments, lest he walk naked and they see his shame." So as we are examining the night watches in the temple, and as we begin to relate it to Yeshua and the events surrounding what led to his death on the tree, it started with his betrayal at night, after he had his Last Supper or Passover meal with his disciples. In Matthew chapter 26, verses 30 and 31, it is written, "And when they had sung a hymn," which is how the Passover Seder concludes with the proclamation of next year in Jerusalem, "they went out into the Mount of Olives. Then said Yeshua unto them, All you shall be offended because of me this night." So even as there were those in the temple who were keeping watch at night in the temple, Yeshua tells his disciples to watch in the night that he was betrayed. In Matthew chapter 26, verses 36 through 38, it is written, "Then came Yeshua unto them unto a place called Gethsemane, and he said to his disciples, Sit here while I go and pray yonder. And he took with him Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee. Then said he unto them, Watch with me." We can further see how Yeshua instructed his disciples to watch as he was being betrayed at night, as we continue in Matthew chapter 26, verses 39 through 41, as it is written, "And he went a little further, and he fell on his face and prayed. And he came to his disciples and found them asleep. And he said to Peter, What? Could you not watch with me 1 hour? Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation." So it was Judas who betrayed Yeshua at night. In Mark chapter 14, verse 10, it is written, And Judas Iscariot, one of the 12, went unto the chief priests to betray him unto them. And then in Mark chapter 14, verses 42 and 43, it is written, Yeshua said, Rise up, let us go. Lo, he that betrays me is at hand. And immediately while he yet spoke, came Judas, one of the 12, and with him a great multitude with swords and staves from the chief priests and the scribes and the elders. And in the process of Judas betraying Yeshua at night, he did so through an insincere kiss. In Mark chapter 14, verses 44 to 46, it is written, And he that betrayed him had given them a sign, saying, Whomsoever I shall kiss, the same is he. Take him and lead him away safely. And as soon as he was come, he goes straightway to him and says, Master, Master. And he kissed him. And they laid their hands on him and took him. In being taken into custody by the chief priests and elders, Yeshua ended up being accused of blasphemy. And while, from their interpretation, blaspheming the name of the God of Israel, Yeshua also said the divine name, Yahweh, or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. In Mark chapter 14, verses 60 to 62, it is written, And the high priest asked Yeshua, Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed? And Yeshua said, I am. Which we're going to see in saying these words, Yeshua spoke the divine name in Hebrew. Yeshua went on and said, And you will see the Son of Man sitting on the right hand of power, a reference to Psalm 110 verse 1, and coming in the clouds of heaven, a reference to Daniel chapter 7 verse 13. And upon hearing Yeshua's words or his testimony, the high priest tore his clothes. We can see this in Mark chapter 14 verses 63 and 64 as it is written. Then the high priest rent his clothes and said, You have heard the blasphemy from Yeshua proclaiming that he was the Messiah and using the divine name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in his answer. So the high priest says, What do you think about what he said? And they all condemned him to be guilty of death. So why did the high priest tear his clothes? The understanding of the answer to this question comes from the Talmud, from Sanhedrin 60a, where it says, Our rabbis taught, He who hears the divine name being blasphemed is bound to rend or tear their garments. So from this viewpoint of rabbinical oral law, we can see how the high priest interpreted that Yeshua spoke blasphemous words against the God of Israel, and in doing so, he used the divine name Yahweh in referring to himself. In the written Torah, it says in Leviticus chapter 21 verse 10 that the high priest is not to tear his clothes, as it is written, And he that is the high priest among his brethren shall not uncover his head nor tear his clothes. Rabbinically, through the understanding of the oral Torah, the rabbis teach that blaspheming the God of Israel and saying the divine name Yahweh or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh is punishable by death. This comes from the Talmud in Sanhedrin 55b and 56a, as it says, The blasphemer is punished only if he utters the divine name. That's Yahweh. The witnesses are examined, and then the chief witness was told, State literally, what did you hear? Thereupon he would do so. And if he testified that the divine name or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was used, the judges then arose and rent or tore their clothes, which in doing so they were not to ever sew them again. In the Torah, we can see that blasphemy of the God of Israel is punishable by stoning. In Leviticus chapter 24, verse 16, it is written, And he that blasphemes the name of the Lord, he shall surely be put to death. And all the congregation shall certainly stone him, as well as the stranger and he that is born in the land. When he blasphemes the name of the Lord, he will be put to death. It was a custom for the priests to warm themselves at the chamber of the fire in the temple. In the Talmud, in Tamid 27a, it explains, In 3 places the priests kept watch in the temple, in the chamber of Abtinus, in the chamber of the spark, and in the fire chamber. The priests would sit in the chamber of the fire to keep warm from a fire which burned there continuously. We can see in the scriptures that Peter warmed himself at the chamber of fire. In Mark chapter 14, verses 54 and 55, it is written, "And they led Yeshua away to the high priest, and with him were assembled all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes. And Peter followed him afar off, even into the palace of the high priest. And he sat with the servants, and he warmed himself at the fire." Peter ended up denying Yeshua before cockcrow. We can see this from Mark chapter 14, verse 30, verses 68 and 72, as it is written, "And Yeshua said unto him, Verily I say unto you, that this day, even in this night, before the cock crows twice, you shall deny me 3 times. And Peter denied Yeshua, saying, I know him not. And Peter went out into the porch, and the cock crew. Verse 72. And the second time the cock crew. And Peter called to mind the word that Yeshua had said unto him, that before the cock crows twice, you shall deny me 3 times. The captain of the temple would make his rounds around dawn or sunrise. From the Talmud in Tamid 26a, it says, anyone who desired to remove the ashes from the altar, which is a part of the activities of the start of the morning service of preparing the morning lamb for sacrifice in the temple, used to rise early, that is before sunrise, and bathe himself before the superintendent came. At what time did the superintendent come? He did not always come at the same time. Sometimes he came just at cockcrow, sometimes a little before or a little after. Cockcrow is sunrise or dawn. From the Talmud, Zevahim 20a. Rabbi Johanan said, if the priest sanctified his hands and feet for the removal of the ashes, as the day's service started at cockcrow, actually the preparation started before dawn, with the removal of a shovelful of ashes from the altar, which was placed at the east side of the slope leading to the altar. Now, cockcrow is not a reference to chickens crowing in the early morning hours, because chickens were not permitted to be inside the limits of Jerusalem. This is explained in the Talmud in Baba Kama 82b. 10 special regulations were applied to Jerusalem, one of them being that no fowls could be raised within the city limits of Jerusalem. So cockcrow was a reference to a person in the temple making an announcement regarding an event of the temple. The Sanhedrin, the judicial court, can only hold a trial during the day. This is explained in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 32a, where it says, capital charges must be tried by day and concluded by day. So let's summarize this part of the teaching on the daily Tamid lamb offering. Number 1, there were night watches in the temple. To the Jews, there were 3 watches in the night, and to the Romans, there were 4 watches in the night. A temple night watcher who fell asleep had his clothes burned. Number 3, the captain of the temple served the high priest of the temple and was the leader over the Levitical guard and the priests that kept watch of the temple at night. Number 4, Yeshua was betrayed at night. Number 5, when Yeshua was betrayed at night, he used temple language by telling his disciples to watch and pray. Number 6, the priests warmed themselves at night at the chamber of the fire. Peter was there the night that Yeshua was betrayed. Number 7, Yeshua was accused of blasphemy and saying the divine name Yahweh or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. And this is the reason why the high priest tore his garments upon Yeshua, from the high priest's interpretation, viewing that Yeshua had blasphemed against the God of Israel while using the divine name. Number 8, in the Torah, the high priest is not supposed to tear his clothes. Number 9, according to rabbinical interpretation, blasphemy against the God of Israel and saying the divine name Yahweh or Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was punishable by death and stoning. Number 10, Peter denied Yeshua before cockcrow. Usually, this was around sunrise or dawn. Number 11, chickens were not permitted to be raised in Jerusalem. The cock crowing referred to the temple crier announcing the start of the day. Number 12, the Sanhedrin can only hold a trial during the day. In the Talmud, in Yoma 20a, it explains that at cockcrow the ashes are removed from the altar. Every day, one would remove the ashes from the altar at Kiryat ha-Geber, a term that refers to the call of Geber. The word Geber in Hebrew means both man and cock, as in a rooster. Thus, this expression is interpreted to mean either at cockcrow or as the officer called them in the morning, or about that time, either before or after. Next, in the Talmud, in Tamid 26a, it explains that there is a drawing of lots to remove the ashes. Anyone who desired to remove the ashes from the altar used to rise early and bathe before the superintendent came. The superintendent would come and knock, and they would open for him, and he would say to them, "Let all who have bathed come and draw lots." So they drew the lots. Continuing from the Talmud in Tamid 28a, it explains that the priest who drew the lot to remove the ashes would first wash his hands and feet. The one on whom the lot had fallen to clear the ashes from the altar made ready, and then they said to him, "Be careful not to touch any vessel until you have washed your hands and feet from the labor." This instruction that the priest who drew the lot to remove the ashes would first wash his hands and his feet comes from the Torah in Exodus chapter 30 verses 18 to 20, as it is written, "And you shall make a laver of copper, for Aaron and his sons shall wash their hands and their feet there. When they go into the tabernacle, they shall wash with water, and when they come near to the altar to minister to burnt offering made by fire unto the Lord." So initially the ashes are put beside the altar. This is explained in Leviticus chapter 6 verses 9 and 10, as it is written, "Command Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the Torah of the burnt offering. And the priest shall put on his linen garment, and his linen breeches shall he put upon his flesh, and take up the ashes which the fire has consumed with the burnt offering on the altar, and he shall put them beside the altar." The details of this process is explained in the Talmud in Yoma 20a, as there it explains the details of the removing of the ashes from the sacrifice altar. Every day, one would remove the ashes at cockcrow. In reality, one did not remove all the ashes, but only a handful. The rest were swept together on top of the altar and formed gradually a cone, as this cone resembled an apple. It was removed only when it occupied too much room or space. For it says in Leviticus chapter 6 verse 11, "And he shall carry forth the ashes without the camp unto a clean place." Continuing in the details of the explanation from the Talmud, Yoma 28b, "And he went up to the top of the altar. Such limbs and pieces of fat as had not been consumed since the evening, they removed to the sides of the altar. If there was no room on the sides, they arranged them on the surround and on the ascent. They then began to throw ashes onto the heap. This heap was in the middle of the altar. So when the volume of the ashes around the altar began to get too large, they would then ultimately be taken and put outside the camp. In Leviticus chapter 6, verses 9 and 11, it is written, "Command Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the Torah of the burnt offering. And he shall put off his garments, and put on other garments, and carry forth the ashes without the camp unto a clean place." So, what was the meaning of this phrase, outside the camp? Where did this refer to? Well, the interpretation was explained in the Talmud in Makot 15a, and making a reference to the verse in Numbers chapter 5 verses 2 and 3 where it says, "Command the children of Israel that they put out of the camp, so that they defiled not their camp in the midst where I dwell." The interpretation is as follows. The camp is here defined by the phrase, "in the midst whereof I dwell." and it means the tabernacle. See Exodus chapter 25 verse 8 and chapter 29 verses 42 to 46, which was situated in the center where the children of Israel resided around the tabernacle, as there were 3 camps. The first being the tabernacle itself, where the priests ministered, which was in the center among the people. And around the tabernacle was the Levites, so they had their camp. And around the Levites was the camp of the rest of the tribes of Israel, or the Israelite camp. So next I'm going to show you a graphical picture of these 3 camps. So here we can see in the center of the dwelling of the Israelite tribes was the tabernacle, where the priests ministered under the Lord. Around the tabernacle is the camp of the Levites. And then around the Levitical camp is the camp of the rest of the tribes of Israel. The 3 tribes on the east side, that is Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun, was known as the camp of Judah. The 3 camps on the south, Gad, Simeon, and Reuben, was known as the camp of Reuben. The 3 tribes to the west, Ephraim, Manasseh, and Benjamin, was known as the camp of Ephraim. And the 3 tribes of the north, Dan, Asher, and Naphtali, was known as the camp of Dan. So the rabbis took the pattern of the layout of the camps of Israel in the wilderness and applied it to Jerusalem. This is explained in the Talmud in Zevahim 55a, where it says, "Clean from the defilement of a leper." Which place is that? That would refer to the camp of the Israelites. And the 3 camps in the wilderness were set up as degrees of holiness, or degrees of sanctity. The highest camp of holiness was the camp of the divine presence, or the tabernacle itself. The lesser camp of holiness from the tabernacle and the divine presence was the camp of the Levites. And the lowest form of sanctity and holiness was the general camp of the Israelites. So that setup in those 3 camps was mapped by the rabbis to correspond to 3 camps associated with Jerusalem. So the temple itself in Jerusalem corresponded to the camp of the divine presence, or the tabernacle. The Temple Mount area corresponded to the camp of the Levites in the wilderness. And finally, the walls surrounding and the city limits of Jerusalem corresponded to the camp of the Israelites in the wilderness. So this is stated in the Talmud in Zevahim 116b, where it says, "Just as there were camps in the wilderness, so there was a camp in Jerusalem. From the walls of Jerusalem to the Temple Mount was the camp of the Israelites. From the Temple Mount to the gate of Nicanor was the Levitical camp. And beyond that was the camp of the divine presence, or the Shekinah." So next we're going to see that the ashes of the burnt offering, the ashes of the sin offering, and the ashes of the red heifer were all instructed in the Torah to be taken outside the camp. So in Leviticus chapter 6, verses 9 and 11, we can see how the ashes of the burnt offering was to be taken outside the camp, as it is written, "Command Aaron and his sons, saying, This is the Torah of the burnt offering. And he shall put off his garments and put on other garments, and carry forth the ashes without or outside the camp unto a clean place." Next, the sin offering. Its ashes were to be taken outside the camp, as we can see from Leviticus chapter 4, verses 8 and 12, as it is written, "And he shall take off from it all the fat of the bullock from the sin offering. Even the whole bullock shall he carry forth without or outside the camp unto a clean place, where the ashes are poured out, and burn him on the wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out shall he be burnt." And next we can see that the ashes of the red heifer were to be taken outside the camp. From Numbers chapter 19, verse 2 and verse 9, it is written, "This is the ordinance of the Torah which the Lord had commanded, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel that they bring thee a red heifer. And a man that is clean shall gather up the ashes of the heifer, and lay them up without the camp in a clean place." So what was the meaning of without or outside the camp? In the Talmud, in Zevahim 105b, it explains, our rabbis taught, even the whole bullock shall he carry forth outside the camp, as is stated in Leviticus chapter 4, verse 12, regarding the sin offering. The meaning of outside the camp is outside the three camps. And in the wilderness, regarding the tabernacle itself, the camp of the priests, and outside the camp of the Levites, as well as the camp of the tribes of Israel, or the Israelites. So, as it related to Jerusalem, what was the meaning of outside the camp? We're going to see from the Talmud in Zevahim 105b that it was interpreted to mean east of Jerusalem or the Mount of Olives. Rabbi Eliezer said, without stated here, that is regarding the sin offering in Leviticus chapter 4 verse 12, and without the camp is stated elsewhere, that is regarding the red heifer in Numbers chapter 19 verse 3. So just as in Leviticus chapter 4 verse 12 regarding the sin offering, it means outside the three camps that were in the wilderness. So here as well regarding the red heifer in Numbers chapter 19 verse 3, it means outside the three camps. And as there, it means on the east of Jerusalem, as the tent of meeting in the wilderness faced east, so here too it means on the east of Jerusalem. And as a result, the red heifer sacrifice was done east of Jerusalem, meaning the Mount of Olives. So the rabbis understood and interpreted that the phrase, a clean place outside the camp, was referring to the Mount of Olives. And we can see this from the Mishnah in Medot 1:3, where there it says, there were 5 gates to the Temple Mount, and the eastern gate over which was a representation of the palace of Susa, and through which the high priest who burnt the red heifer and all who assisted with it used to go forth to the Mount of Olives, which is located to the east of Jerusalem, where thus the red heifer sacrifice was burnt. Continuing in the explanation that the clean place outside the camp was on the Mount of Olives, from the Mishnah, Medot 2:4, it goes on to say, all the walls of the temple were high except the eastern wall, so that the priest who burnt the red heifer might, while standing on the top of the Mount of Olives, by directing his gaze carefully, he could see the door of the Hekal, or the palace or the temple, at the time of the sprinkling of the blood. So in the first century, there was a bridge or a causeway that was built from the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives. This is explained in Mishnah Parah 3:6, where it says, the causeway was made from the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives, whereby the priest who was to burn the cow, that is the red heifer, the cow itself and all who aided in its preparation went forth to the Mount of Olives. A reference to this causeway or bridge from the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives is mentioned in Luke chapter 19 verse 37, as it is written, and when he, that is Yeshua, was come nigh even now at the descent of the Mount of Olives, a reference to the bridge or the causeway, the whole multitude of the disciples began to rejoice and praise God with a loud voice for all the mighty works that they had seen. So in all there were 3 ash pits, and one of the 3 ash pits was located outside the camp. This is explained in the Talmud in Zevahim 104b, where it says, Rabbi Nachman said in Rabbah son of Abba's name, there were 3 ash pits. There was the large ash pit in the temple court, and there was secondly an ash pit on the Temple Mount, while those which were burnt in pursuance of their rites were burnt, where the third ash pit was located, which was outside the 3 camps associated with the boundaries of the city of Jerusalem itself. We're told in the book of Hebrews, in Hebrews chapter 13 verse 11, that Yeshua was crucified outside the camp, as it is written. For the bodies of those beasts whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned without or outside the camp. Continuing in Hebrews chapter 13 verse 12, it is written, Wherefore Yeshua, also that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered or died outside the gate. or the city walls of Jerusalem. So let's summarize this part of the teaching on the daily Tamid lamb offering. And it is as follows. Number 1, around sunrise, lots would be drawn to remove the ashes from the altar. Number 2, the priest who drew the lot to remove the ashes from the altar would first wash his hands and feet. Number 3, initially, the ashes were put beside the altar. And once the ashes accumulated, they would later be taken outside the camp to a clean place. Number 4, there were 3 camps associated with the tabernacle when the children of Israel were in the wilderness. First was the tabernacle itself, which was the camp of the priests. Second was the camp of the Levites. And thirdly, the camp of the tribes of Israel. Number 5, the 3 camps associated with the tabernacle corresponded to the 3 camps of Jerusalem. The first camp was the temple itself. The second camp was the Temple Mount. And the third camp was associated with the walls in the city limits of Jerusalem itself. Number 6, the ashes of the burnt offering, the sin offering, and the red heifer were taken outside the camp to a clean place. Number 7, outside the camp, when the children of Israel were in the wilderness and the tabernacle was in the midst of them, was understood to be the eastern side of the tribes of Israel. This corresponded to outside the camp as it related to Jerusalem to be to the east of Jerusalem, which was the Mount of Olives. Number 8, as a result, Yeshua was crucified outside the camp on the Mount of Olives. So this is going to conclude part 1 of our teaching on the daily Tamid lamb offering. So stay with us for part 2, as among other things, we're going to explain and share with you how the day's events in the temple regarding the offering of the daily Tamid lamb offering, both in the morning and in the evening, foreshadows and is linked with Yeshua's death on the tree. It will be eye-opening and a big blessing to you.